101 holding by Leviticus chapter 18. Again, 101 holding by the book of Leviticus chapter 18, one verse, still in verse 5. Torah says, Shmartem es hukosai v'es mishpatai sheyase oisam adam v'chai behem ani Hashem. So here, the Torah says, again, you shall therefore keep my ordinances, my judgments, things that make sense, things that don't make sense, which a man shall do, you shall live in them, and that's what we're focusing on. You should live in them. I am the eternal. So we've been speaking the last number of weeks in the Rabbeinu B'chai, and the Rabbeinu B'chai had mentioned there were 4 different types of life we're talking about, right? That a person merits in establishing Torah mitzvahs, right? The last one we spoke about was tshuva, was about repentance. The person can be evil. Someone who's evil is considered like they're dead, right? We spoke about that. And once he returns, he does tshuva, he repents, he's considered among the living, right? That was the third. That was the third of the fourth of the 4. Comes along the Rabbeinu B'chai further, and he mentions the 4th one. Okay, so what's the 4th one? He says the 4th one is life after death, right? What we call Techiyat HaMetim, right? Resurrection of the dead, which is last of the 13 principles of faith. And he says these are the 4 types of life that are included in the word v'chai behem, right? I.e. to live by them. So what's the 4th thing? So the 4th thing is life after death, right? We spoke before about a person gets sick and then they get healed, right? It's like they're coming back from the dead, right? So that we spoke about. Here he's telling you there's such a concept as life after death. Now, what's the obvious question? The obvious question is, someone will say, well, I've never met anyone in that world, right, who's come back. Very good. Maybe true. Doesn't mean life after death doesn't exist. We pray that 3 times a day, right? We say God, in the Shemona Esrei, we say God brings back. It's going to bring back the dead. Obviously, you have to merit that, right? There's a certain level a person has to reach, even to reach a portion, to get a portion of the world to come, right? Having a portion in the world to come, right, is the Ramchal says, and Derech Hashem, he says, the way of God, that there's a minimal level that you have to reach. Now, he doesn't tell you what that level is, right, but a certain level a person has to reach. So the assumption would be, and I think it's a pretty fair assumption, and that is, the assumption is, if a person got a portion of the world to come, then most likely, if they, they did enough in this world, even though they have to, let's say, get fixed up in the next world, right? In Gehenna or hell, as some people define it, as getting your soul purged for all the sins that it did. Assuming there's something left of the soul, most people are not that evil, not intrinsically that evil. I mean, there are evil people, right, that could lose their portion of the world to come, but in general, a person, if their soul gets purged enough, they should have a portion of the world to come. Might be a smaller portion, might be a bigger portion, right? Depends what they have done, right? Regardless of that, some people may lose their portion, may end up getting reward for maybe the few mitzvahs they did in this world, but then God is going to obliterate them. Again, most people probably not in that category. Most likely, people are not necessarily that evil. I'm not going to say there aren't souls that will get obliterated. I mean, ignorance is bliss up to a point, but still, I don't think most people are that evil. But in either case, my assumption would be, because I didn't finish the statement, my assumption would be that a person, if they would merit a portion in the world to come, then most likely they are going to get up a resurrection of the dead. Now, again, is that a guarantee? I wouldn't say it's a guarantee. The prophets talk about the awesome day of judgment, right? This is after the Messiah comes. Certainly after the Messiah comes. Yeah. The awesome day of judgment, meaning resurrection. That means every soul, God is going to look at that soul, pierce through that soul, and see if it deserves to be resurrected or not. So my guess would be that if a person merited the world to come, merited a portion of the world to come, most likely I would assume they should have a portion of the world to come. They should get up a resurrection of the dead. Right? That would be the assumption. It wouldn't make so much sense, if they have this portion in the spiritual world, whatever it did, in this world in a positive way, then why shouldn't it get up a resurrection of the dead? Right? Why should it not be put in some type of body, whatever that body is? Nobody knows, but to be put in that type of body, right? At resurrection, it wouldn't make so much sense. Except you could tell me, well, that's a different type of judgment, it's a much more stringent type of judgment, right? In other words, who's going to be in that final world, whatever that world looks like? Who's going to be in that final world? So you want people, that tried, that worked hard, whatever, that did what God said to do or tried to do what God said to do. Now, again, it could be someone who doesn't know anything. Yeah, somehow they can merit a portion of the world to come, maybe a small portion, whatever it may be. They could, right? People have used the argument, it's a bad argument, but they've used the argument. They say at the beginning of every chapter, Techiyat, of Ethics for Fathers, it says every Jew is a portion of the world to come. Right? So I've heard people say, well, you are just going to get a bigger portion than me. But I also have a portion. Right? I also have a portion of the world to come. Very good. What's the problem? What's the problem with that statement? The problem with that statement is they didn't learn the Gemara on that statement. Because what does the Gemara say? Gemara makes very clear that there are people who are going to lose their portion of the world to come. It says every Jew is going to have a portion. Okay. But there are people who lose their portion of the world to come. It's not across the board. Right? It's not a blanket statement. Obviously it has to be understood. Right? But you tell me every Jew, even someone who's evil, even someone, doesn't keep Torah mitzvahs, they should have a portion of the world to come. So the Gemara gives examples. Right? The generation of the flood, they don't have a portion of the world to come. They got wiped out. Yeah, in this world and the next world. Generation dispersion, right? By Tower of Babel, they also got wiped out. Certain kings also got wiped out. Means they're not coming back. Right? It means they're not coming back. Period. They're not coming back. Right? So someone says, see, every Jew is going to get a portion of the world to come. Survey says, not true. Definitely not true. There are people who are not going to merit it. You think somebody's intermarried, they die, God's giving them a portion of the world to come? Why would you do that? They're intermarried. Right? Not the non-Jew's fault. It's the Jew's fault. Okay. Right? Give an example. The Gemara in Avram says that Avram Avinu, Abraham, sits by the pit of Ganu. Right? And any Jew, now it's kind of hard to understand, any Jew that comes by, he deflects them. Right? That they shouldn't go in. that they shouldn't have to suffer going in. Except, the Gemara says, someone doesn't do bris milah. A Jew that does not do circumcision. Yeah, that's what the Gemara says. But the Gemara doesn't give any other example. It doesn't say someone who committed adultery. It doesn't say somebody who stole. Right? Not going to have a portion of the world to come. It's not going to go into Ganem. It doesn't say somebody, I don't know, murdered somebody. Someone did idolatry, other things. Right? It only says somebody didn't do circumcision. A Jew didn't do circumcision. Now, does that mean that's the only case? I mean, the Gemara doesn't tell me any other case. That's the only case. He lets them fall in. So that's why Rabbi the following question. After going through this Gemara, that's a very simple question. Yeah, my very simple question is: a Jew married to a non-Jew? The Gemara doesn't say. So I asked him. I said, "What about a Jew married to a non-Jew? Is Abraham going to deflect the Jew and not let him go into Ganem, and not let him get fixed up?" Right? My Rebbe gave me a 4-word answer. What was the 4-word answer? He goes, "What do you think?" That was the answer. Yeah, not everything is bliss over here. Not that Abraham's going to say, "I'm going to save every single Jew." Someone desecrates Shabbos in public. Yeah. So today, people desecrate Shabbos in public. What happens? Why are they doing it? Because they don't know any better. Right? I may tell me, well, it's really about a rebellion against God. Okay, but why do most people sin today? Bottom line, desire. It's about desire. It's not about I thought about it, I learned about it, and I rejected outright. I didn't learn about it. Tell somebody says, I'm an atheist, not an agnostic, I'm an atheist. Okay. So did you ever study, I don't know, philosophy? Socrates, Aristotle? No. Did you ever study, later philosophers, Kant, Kierkegaard? No. Did you ever study the Jewish philosophers? Right? Yudah Levi, right? Who wrote the Kuzari. The Rambam. No. Did you ever read the Bible from cover to cover? No, but I saw the movie. Beautiful. So you're not an atheist, you're an idiot. Right? Why? Person thought for a few minutes, like, yeah, I don't believe in God, and I'm convinced there is no God. Did you ever study? Did you ever learn? Did you ever think about it? No, I know I'm not an atheist. Yeah, and I'm very convinced I'm not an atheist based on nothing. Yeah, so a person like that, they don't know any better. They never learned, but doesn't mean, right, as we mentioned many times, it doesn't mean whatever you do, God's going to look the other way. It's certainly not true. For certain things, okay, we're going to look at the person like a Tino Chanishma, somebody who is a child who captive by the non-Jews. They grew up as a potato farmer in Idaho. Right? No offense to anyone's potato farmer grew up in Idaho. They grew up knowing absolutely zero. Yeah, so why is God going to zap them? And not give them anything? They didn't know any better. Okay. So most things that they do is like they did it by accident. Not on purpose. They didn't know any better. Okay. But certain things have certain ramifications. Right? Regardless of whether they understood what they're doing or not. Right? A Jew doesn't keep Shabbos. Why don't they keep Shabbos? Oh, it's antiquated laws. Why would God care if I rip toilet paper on Shabbos? Other things. Somewhere else, I'll just answer this while I'm speaking about that. And that is, can you extinguish a fire on Shabbos? No. In general, no. If you're going to burn down the house, then you're allowed to, if it's pikuach nefesh. But in general, just putting it out, you wouldn't be allowed to. Right? It would be forbidden to do. If it could lead to worse things, you're allowed to put it out. Right? All of a sudden, candle fell over on the table. Starts burning the tablecloth. Can you put it out? There are ways to put it out. Right? You don't just put it out straight away, right? Unless you have no choice. You take, let's say huge jugs of water, put it around there, and it goes out by itself. That you can do. But again, we're talking about a dangerous situation. It's not a dangerous situation, I can't extinguish it. Right? Whether let's say, the oven's on, or something like that, unless the gas went out, right? So the gas went out, so then you're allowed to turn it off, right? Because that could be dangerous, right? You do it with the shino, you do it with the, with a different hand to turn it off. But in general, extinguishing would be forbidden, right? So in this case, about Shabbos, just threw that in there. Yeah, someone asked. So very good. So the person does a great Shabbos in public. Yeah, if they touch wine, a Jew, if they touch wine that's not cooked, can I drink it? No. Right? If it's semi-dry or dry wine in general, that the bottle says lo mavushal, it's not pasteurized, right? It's not cooked, right? It's like an anju, it's like spiritual cooties. I can't touch it, right? Let's say better. I can't drink from it. If the bottle, let's make clear, if the bottle was open, yeah, there are ramifications, regardless of whether the person knows something or not. Can I enter amen to their blessing? Depends. Yeah, why would it depend? Depends what they're holding in the world. If they're like an absolute atheist and they don't care, whatever, I shouldn't be allowed to answer their blessing. Right? In other words, they're mentioning God's name. Who knows what they're thinking? I'm not saying it's idolatry. I'm not going that far, but what's my point? The point is, regardless of whether they know something or not, there are ramifications. But there's a red line. Let's make very clear. There is a red line. Yeah. What's the red line? The red line is, if you'd ask any Jew who's associated with the synagogue, yeah, we'll make it very clear. If they're not associated with the synagogue, they're probably not going to care. But if you would ask them, yes or no, no buts, is the Jew allowed to marry a non-Jew? They'll say no, but, right, according to the Bible. They'll say no, but, no, there are no buts. Now, if someone is not affiliated with the synagogue, they probably won't care. They'll say it doesn't matter. Okay. Right? But it doesn't matter. Right? One action, I just want to point this out. I mentioned this many times, but good things always are good to be repeated. And that is, every decision we make has ramifications, good or bad. Right? The book Made in Heaven by Rabbi Coffman, oh, bless the memory, is a book about marriage. Now, in this book about marriage, when I was engaged, I had this book, or someone had it, whatever. So I started going through the introduction. Didn't make it past the introduction. Why? It says for Rabbi Coffman like this: decision you make, whoever a person's going to marry, yeah, it has ramifications for you, for your spouse, for future children, if you have children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all the way down. Right? All the way down the line. I'm like, who, me? Bam, shut the book. Who we marry matters. Right? As Gemara Kedushin says, we are half a soul. So in order to complete that soul, person has to have a soulmate. Right? Two halves of a soul, two people together, man and woman. We'll make this very simple. Right? Man and women get together. Right? That completes the soul. Now, what happens if a person marries a non-Jew and they don't convert? Let's say. They don't convert. They're not interested in converting. They don't have to. All right, there's no obligation for them to convert. Okay. So I have one half of the soul, which is now not meeting its soulmate. Doesn't matter how they met, what happened, it's not your soulmate. Because a Jew is never going to have a soulmate with a non-Jew unless that non-Jew converts properly. It'll never be their soulmate. So now, think about it. Think about it. What happened to all those children potentially they're supposed to have? And then grandchildren and whatever. So now you have one person. I'm only talking one case. One person that marries a non-Jew. One Jew marries a non-Jew. Yeah, now God has to use the matrix, right, so to speak, or we'll say God is the matrix in that sense. He's now going to have to figure out what to do now with these other souls. Because we understand, the Gemara says, in Sanhedrin, the Gemara says that the Messiah cannot come unless all the souls come out of heaven. Right? All the souls underneath God's heavenly throne, whatever that means. So all the souls have to come out of heaven in order for the Messiah to come. Very good. So now, if two people don't get together, how are they going to have this child? How's this soul going to come? Right now, you just messed up a whole generation of people. Yeah. So now God's going to have to orchestrate it for the other half of the soul. Now, what about the other half of the soul? The other half soul is now not going to find the one that is supposed to marry. So therefore, God's going to have to orchestrate it somehow that these souls come out however they do. Now, this is only one person who messes up. If the statistics today are 60 to 70%, between 50 and 70%, some places even higher, of intermarriage. So let's say 60%, That means 6 out of 10 Jews marry the wrong person, right? So the half soul doesn't mean it's right half soul, right? And what about all those other souls supposed to come out? Right? Obviously, God didn't figure out anything, right? But think about it. That's totally messed up, right? If one soul messes up, imagine if half a dozen souls mess up on a regular basis, right? That's a big mess. That is a huge mess. Now, what this means is very simply, right? People say live and let live. What's the big deal? Right? What is the big deal? Now, if you think about it a little bit deeper, it is a big deal. It's a huge deal. Right? We are made up of body and soul. Everybody is a half a soul. You meet the wrong person. What happens? I'll give you 2 scenarios. Let's say a Jew marries another Jew. Very good. Let's say they marry another Jew and they end up getting divorced. Now you say, but wasn't that person their bashir? Wasn't the person their soulmate, so to speak, they were supposed to marry? You say they were the soulmate. So how could the soulmate get messed up? And even if they had kids, very good, but what happened to that? What happened to those soulmates? What happened? Right, I'll give a very simple parable. Very simple parable. You take a flower, right? You take a flower, you don't water it, right? What happens if you don't water it or give it enough sunlight? The flower will die, right? That's what's going to happen, right? Every single time the flower will die. So the same thing. Even if a person's married to the right person, it's only going to work at. Now, probably in the top 3 reasons people get divorced is they fall apart. They draw apart. Let's say better. Yeah, maybe what's important to them when they were younger is not so important to them when they're older, right? So to speak, they not fall apart. They drift apart. Yeah, maybe somewhere down the line, what they have more in common, right? Let's say they have kids, is their kids and their grandkids. But they have now less in common because of whatever. Whatever they think, whatever they've gone through, whatever it may be. Yeah, but you see, but that's not the way it's supposed to be. You're right. Right? And marriage is not a 5-year option to renew. Right? The person gets married, all things being equal, they stay married. Now, is a Jew allowed to get divorced? Yes. Is it on the books? Yes. Book of Deuteronomy says very clear. Person one's going to get divorced, again, under whatever circumstances they are. You get divorced. There is divorce. Right? And there's a mitzvah to get divorced. Big mitzvah to get divorced. A person married to someone, let's say, you just can't stay married to them. They do all kinds of crazy things, maybe mental health issues, maybe other things, and, you can't stay married, right? You don't just throw in the towel, you got to give it work. What if one side doesn't want to work? They don't want to work on themselves. So the other spouse has to make a decision, right? What's the decision going to be? How much they can take, and if they can't take it. Let's say they go for therapy. Very good. What if therapy doesn't know? Not saying therapy is the end of all things, but let's say, let's just say, they have a good therapist. They say, listen, this is where the person is. They're not going to change. Never going to change. You have to make a decision, right? You have an obligation to make a decision. Can you take this or you can't take this? I know the story, none of the details. Right, but the way, at least I heard, was they also married for many, many years. And one spouse says to the other, this is something, I can't tolerate. And if you don't do something about it, I can't tolerate it anymore. Yeah. So either you gotta get help, you gotta figure out how to change it, or that's it. Basically, as far as I understand, the person said, no, not willing to do that, and they get divorced. Now you say, but let's say this is the right one they're supposed to marry. Yeah. So you're going to say, the other Gemara says, when someone gets divorced, the Jew gets the divorce, what happens? Tears shed from the altar, right? We don't see that, but God feels the pain. God feels the pain. Now, just for argument's sake, was this person their soulmate? Yes. Right? Let's just say for argument's sake, yes. So then, if that's true, and God put them together, and they're supposed to be together, then it shouldn't go south. Then there's no reason that it should go south. Now, if you look at the relationship, and you look at what happened, what do you have? You have different circumstances, different things have happened. Yeah, and if you don't work on it, no matter how long you've been married, right? If you don't work at it, what's going to happen? It'll go south. You're only staying together out of convenience. That doesn't mean anyone's happier. It's out of convenience. Okay. Convenience is nice. I wouldn't say it's exciting. I wouldn't say it's something, you want to get up for every day. Okay, but it's better than the alternative. Okay. But, today, in previous generations could be because of the stigma of being divorced. Today, much less of a stigma in the Orthodox community to get divorced, right? But it could be back in the day, people say married anyway, even in bad marriage. Yeah, even in bad marriage. Why? Because that's what they did. Maybe they'll claim they did it for the sake of their kids, and it was better. They just had that structure, whatever. And then they didn't get divorced. Right? Today is a very different thing. Right? First of all, it's certainly not as, big of a stigma as it used to be. That's for sure. And, it's common, unfortunately, that people get divorced. Even more common, people get divorced after the first year, right, of marriage, which is, unfortunately, it's not a new phenomenon. It definitely is on the rise for any number of reasons. But the point is, like anything else, you have to work at it. And sometimes the work is very hard. And sometimes looking into yourself, and knowing what you've done and who you are and who you've become, for whatever reason, by someone who knows you very well, is not good. Right? It's not good. Now the question is, what's the other person willing to do? Again, let's say that person there's no one to talk to. There's no one to talk to. So if there's no one to talk to, then the other person has to make the decision. This is a very hard decision. In many ways. You got family obligations. Monetary obligations, right? Let's say. You have kids. Whatever. Not so simple. Definitely not so simple. Now, some people will say, for the sake of my kids, I'll do this. Others will say, no, like I've had it, like that's it. I'm not doing it. And unless something changes, it's over. Yeah. So today it's more common. I'm not saying people should work on it. They should work on it. Can every marriage be fixed? No. Can't be fixed. Some could, right? But again, you have to put in the effort. If the effort's been put in, and still nothing comes out of it, and still it's bad, then you made the effort. You made a very strong effort. Okay, it's very sad. This is what happened, but at the end of the day, can't live together. That's it, right? You have no choice. And sometimes it's going to happen. Do some people get divorced when the marriage could have been saved? Yes. And it certainly happened. Yeah, because working it out and working on yourself and through your own difficulties is hard. First of all, people don't want to see themselves in a bad light. Sometimes, you get into such bad habits, even if you know what triggers it and everything else, you're stuck, right? You're stuck. So the question is how you get unstuck. So again, I'm not going to praise every single therapist out there. Some therapists you probably throw under the bus for good reason, right? There'll be some good people out there that can help, right? Can certainly help, right? They can cause more problems. I've heard stories like that also. Yeah, and someone being, very dependent on therapists, and therapists cause all kinds of problems. Yesh for yesh, there are cases like that and cases like other things. Fine, right? Some people say, forget about therapists. Therapists is going to ruin everything. Okay. I mean, I think there are probably better therapists out there than others. That's fine. Right. But if you leave it on its own, no matter how much Torah a person learns, I would love, because I get this question all the time, if if the Torah is so strong, it should, uproot all these negative things. Now, someone went through let's say a trauma, for instance, Torah's not going to uproot that. You can understand maybe philosophically, look at the bigger picture, different things. But at the end of the day, the pain is raw. It can be raw for years, for decades. Pain can be very raw. And at the end of the day, because the pain is raw, Torah doesn't affect it. Torah won't affect it. Now, why not? So, anyone thinks Torah is a magic formula and a person's going to become religious, going to, change them for the better and all kinds of different things. It's not true. Right? Right? It's not true. It can help. 100% it can help. Right? To uproot something totally. Only being, only by, learning Torah and learning Musar and this and that by yourself. I don't know, some things only help, with medication. Medication can help. Right? With this and with proper guidance. Right? The issue, the issue is we'd all love this because we all go through certain things. We'd all love to say, yeah, I'm going to be steeped in Torah whenever I learn Torah. I want to work on this. This I know is bad. Right? This character trait I know is bad. Right? This I know is causing problems. Okay, so you try and dissect it. Right? Try and learn the right books. How am I going to be affected in a positive way? How can I uproot it or keep it at bay, so to speak? Right? You say, okay, what are you talking about? Be specific. So use one case, anger. Anger. Now, everyone has anger at some point. Some more anger, some less anger. I've heard a number of people say, God gave me billion doses of anger. Okay. Get angry at every little thing. Okay. Well, that obviously has to be worked on. Because if a person gets angry at every little thing, you're never still married. Right? It's just not going to happen. Right? Your spouse does something wrong, bam. Doesn't matter why they did it. Doesn't matter why they did it. Right? You knocked them out. Not physically. But you lash out at them. And it always happens. And there's a cycle. And the other person, is always walking on eggshells. When's the next outburst going to be? Et cetera. So the person has to work on it. Now, a person going to say, they understand in theory and in practice why anger is bad. Good. So what are they going to do the next, first of all, what triggers it? What triggers different things you get angry at? Now, let's say you get angry, at the drop of a hat. Why? What triggers it? Right? Again, some people, because we are biased against ourselves, we don't see what we ourselves do. We don't see it. Right? So understanding where it comes from, right? You may need someone else to dig deep to see what happened. Because this could be something, and unfortunately, people have things in their childhood they never got over. Right? And I'm not saying they're easy to get over. right? A person gone through trauma. Person grew up, know a number of people like this. People grew up with narcissist parents. Right? It's kind of hard to deal with, right? Because it's all about them, nothing about you. And whatever you say really doesn't matter because they want to hear themselves. Right? Very hard to deal with people like that. So growing up, a person, they don't feel the love. They for sure don't feel the love. They feel like, whatever's important to the parent, good. But if it's not important to the parent, but it's important to you, don't care. Right? Now, when you get older, you understand this. Yeah, it makes it a little bit easier to deal with. It's still alive. Why? Because you understand they're messed up psychologically. It's a sickness. It's a sure sickness. Yeah. And only serious therapy is going to knock that out. Yeah. A person who's narcissistic is like, deep, deep therapy, to knock that out. Now, what I would hope would happen, which certainly not a guarantee by any stretch, and I'm not a psychologist, or I didn't play one on TV either, so you can take this with a grain of salt, right? What I would think is like this. I would think, okay, go back when a person was young, right? Let's say that this is when it happened, and the parents made like cutting comments, like nasty comments, maybe a parent, would say, even when they're older, a parent would say, well, nobody really cares what you have to say. Nobody really cares what you think. Now, that's kind of demoralizing, right? We're not saying that everything you say, parent, sibling, somebody is going to say, oh, that's the answer. That's so profound. And you can help me with this. They're going to pat you on the back. Forget about that. I don't want to hear it. Right? And when somebody says something like that, no matter what age, obviously if it's younger, it's, I think in many ways more devastating, but even when you're older, right? A child, a sibling does not want to hear what they think and what they do is worthless and that they're useless. And whatever adjective you want to put in there, it's not going to give this person a lot of self-esteem. But if you understand that this person is a sick pup, and this person deserves to be strung up and put in an insane asylum because they are actually insane, because what they're saying goes against 1.5 million different things in Torah. When I look at them as being mentally challenged, that takes part of the sting away. Now, it's going to take apart all of the sting, right? It's going to take it away. I wouldn't say all of it. I'm saying how Levi this would work. But as a person gets older and they get wiser, and they understand, right, how these things work. So then, if a parent, sibling, someone says, well, you're ever caught picking heads, whatever you say, like, really doesn't matter, you don't live in this world, like this, they lay it on. They lay it on, right? Like someone said, like, who cares what you have to say? Get off your soapbox, save it, save it for your students. Now, that can be very offensive. That can make a person feel like a piece of dirt. Yeah. But on the other hand, you got people who do want to listen, right? So, okay, so I won't waste it on you. I'll save it on people who care, right? But now, if someone would have said that, let's say 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the person would have been broken, let's say. They would have been totally cut down, totally made fun of, right? The self-esteem gets shot in the head. Yeah, now, if a person was already holding strong anyway, so they're not going to care. If like, who are you? Like, they can answer straight back. Okay. But what does it do? It stings. It stings. They're telling you, you're not worth anything. They're telling you what you think doesn't matter. Yeah? Like you're a nobody. Like, who are you? Like, yeah, okay, I hit a raw nerve. Very good. But who are you? You're like a nothing. You're a zero. You're a zero. So you know what I did with that comment? I went, think. I didn't bother to answer. No answer. I gotta sit there, get depressed and feel bad and whatever, maybe years ago. Today, those person's mentally, challenged. I won't say the R word, right? Can't say the R word or around certain at least for YouTube, we'll keep it clean. Yeah. Yeah. But at the end of the day, what? Who cares what they say? Right? But deep down, someone's gonna say, doesn't that bother you? No. You know why it doesn't bother me? Because the person has a 5 IQ when it comes to Torah. It's got a 5 IQ when it comes to mitzvahs, when it comes to Musar, when it comes to other things. Right? So I'll take it out on everybody else, right? I'll vent it out. It's good therapy. Yeah? But why doesn't it mean anything? Because where's the person coming from? I understand where the person's coming from. Right? But some people will say, but regardless, isn't sometimes people are going to say things just to get under your skin and want to get a reaction out of you? Yeah, sometimes. Right? But at the end of the day, person says such a thing. They can't go back, and we've said this many times. They can't go back and say, well, I was, I really shouldn't have said that, and I was angry, I didn't really mean it. Right? Those words go right out the window. Why do those words go out the window? Those words go out the window because that's exactly what they thought. That is exactly what they thought. Yeah, in other words, it's part of their psyche. Since it's part of their psyche, it's part of them. They can't say, well, the slip of the tongue. Why? Because that's what they thought. Right? We mentioned this many times. Now, someone could backtrack, and they can say, no, don't worry about it. It's only kidding. Because now they see you're upset. But say, like, why are you so upset? Don't worry about it. I was only joking. No, they meant it. They meant it. They meant to knock you down. And if they had the choice again, they would say the same thing. They meant it. Now, does that mean they're cruel to be cruel? Not necessarily. It's a reaction, right? And that's how they act sometimes when they get angry. They tell someone off. Okay. So I said many times on myself, if I said something and someone told me off and I deserved it, okay. And if I didn't deserve it, let's say maybe the few times didn't deserve it. So what are you going to get upset about? What's the purpose? God sent you this person to say this to you. Yeah, that person's like the stick. Okay. Right? So they're giving you your own muster. Okay. So maybe God's telling you, don't be so conceited. Don't think you're God's gift to the world. Don't think because you do this, that, and the other thing, whatever. Maybe that's part of it. Right? Everyone has ego at a certain point, certain level. Right? So maybe it's to knock your ego down a little bit. Okay. Right? But at the end of the day, what does the person want? The person wants you to take it to heart. That's what the person wants. Their goal is there to knock you down. That's their goal. Yeah? That's their goal. Now, maybe under other circumstances, they wouldn't have said it the way they did. Maybe. They got under the collar, they said it. Okay. Now a person would ask, because this question comes up as well, all things said and done, isn't that mean? How'd you make it, did it make you feel bad? You got to see where it's coming from. It's coming from a dimwit, a doofus in Torah. I'm going to take seriously what a doofus says. They say, oh, yeah, and this is a mistake people make also. You have what to say. Let's say person has enough knowledge. They answer somebody. Now, they answer in a confident way. how can someone look at it in the wrong way? They can say, "Oh, you seem so sure of yourself. Sure you're not like a little bit conceited? A little bit conceited, right?" The Rambam says, when it comes to bad character traits, you always go to one extreme, you try and end up in the middle, except by certain character traits. One of them is anger. And the other, which is the base, Orthodox Tzaddikim, the ways of the righteous, says that the base of all bad character traits is being conceited. That's the base. Now, most people today have lack of self-esteem, but there are plenty of people out there also, that are conceited. Probably more that have lack of self-esteem, but okay. Now, if a person is confident in what they know, and they, as if to say, they have a PhD in this topic, i.e. Judaism. Let's say, pilot higher and deeper, or Papa has no. First has knowledge. They have knowledge of Torah. Now, does that mean they know everything? No. But they have knowledge. Now, if they come across, confidence, and they say, what you say goes against this, that, and the other thing. When you start listing off things. It's because you have knowledge. You're not giving the information to show what you know, right? You're giving the information to show that the person's wrong. It's not tit for tat over here because they don't have what to give. They don't have what to answer. Okay. So you're saying, well, I have a source like this, says like this. Another source like this, and a third source like this. And it can't mean like you say like this, and like, oh, you sound very confident, right? Like as if to say you conceded SOB, you think you know. You think you know. I don't know. Been studying for 20 years, 30 years, I should know something. Should know something. I mean, plenty of things I don't know. Okay. First to admit. I'm always happy. People point things out and say, no, it's something like this, like this. And, I have to go back and check it. And very good. Okay. I mean, we're perfect by any stretch. Right? But you would never argue with someone with a PhD without proper knowledge. Nobody would ever do that. It's a chutzpah to do. Yeah. Stephen Hawking, one of the greatest physicists of our day, big heretic as well. Yeah. Person read one article on Wikipedia on physics, you're going to knock him out? I don't think so. I was once with Dr. Gerald Schroeder, should be well. He wrote a book called Genesis and the Big Bang about how to reconcile creation with the age of the universe. So I took him once to speak in Tel Aviv University. So he told me, he's done the discovery program at Torah about different, he was part of a, panel discussion of different ways to see the Torah and how it can be proven true. Right, one person explained it, historically, sociologically, did it according to science, their computer codes, other things, whatever. Okay, so, they have people go through this program, and not going to convince them each thing in and of itself, not going to convince someone that the Torah is true. But if you look at all these different things together, makes a pretty strong impression, right? A pretty strong picture over here that. A, there's a God in the world, and B, that the Torah is true, and that Judaism is true. But in any case, he once told me, let's say better, he did tell me that when he speaks in front of the college students, I was taking him to Tel Aviv University to speak to English-speaking college students, and he's going to speak about this, right? That was the topic, about Genesis and the age of the universe. So he said, now he's got 2 PhDs. I mean, he's not a dummy by any stretch. He got, a PhD in physics, and I forget what the other PhD is. What's the second one? PhD in nuclear physics and Earth, and what's the other one? PhD in nuclear physics and Earth and planetary sciences. Right? He's got 2 PhDs. Whether you hold the PhDs or not, whatever. He's got 2 PhDs. 2 very strong PhDs from MIT. Yeah, not a slouch school by any stretch. In either case, he told me when he speaks to college students, right? Even the best of them, even the best of college students that he speaks to, when he speaks about physics. So he told me clear as day that when he speaks physics, he says within 5 minutes, and he said it usually doesn't take more than 5 minutes. He said within 5 minutes, he said he lost everybody in physics. Now the question is, okay, so you're talking physics, and now you're going to try and put it into Torah. Okay. So why do I use that as an example? Use as an example because no one in their right mind, because of the knowledge that he has. Now, I'm not saying the person can't ask questions. They absolutely can ask questions. They should ask questions, right? If they have good questions, okay. But nobody in their right mind, if they don't even have a BA in physics, for goodness sakes, or more than that, he's probably got them beat, right? That would be my guess, right? He probably can knock them around like with his pinky because of the knowledge that he has. Because he's got very strong knowledge in physics, extremely strong knowledge in physics, right? And 2 PhDs and all that. Very good. Someone there is going to say, well, I just read this article and, like this answers everything you just said. Yeah. So he probably knows about the article, probably can answer the article, right? Let's say. Right? So maybe it's a good starting point, maybe. But you think someone with a PhD in their field, someone with a lot less experience, with a lot less, let's say that better, right? A lot less knowledge, they're going to sit there and argue on the same level? They'll never argue. They'll never argue on the same level. Impossible. Why? They don't have the knowledge. Not a knock on them. That's a fact. Right? They don't have the knowledge. But there are people who make claims all the time without any knowledge. And they'll say, my opinion is just as valid. Now, what's the difference? You read the Bible from cover to cover? No. I saw 10 Commandments. Okay. Yeah, that's a start. You never learned. You never did research. They don't really know very much about the topic, but you talk like you're authoritative. Now, that's kind of a problem. Now, why do they want to talk authoritative? To make you look bad. To put you down. As if to say, we're one and one. We're on the same, we're the same. Well, you're not the same. It's totally not even close. Right? Or somebody says, at least they're honest. I may not have researched it that much or any, but my opinion is this. Now, they're being honest. They'll say they don't have what to back it up with, right? They don't have what to say on the topic, but this is what their heart tells them. This is what my heart tells me. What do I give a rat's tail? My heart tells you. The only thing I'll grant over here is you admitted you don't know very much on the topic. Good. You don't know very much on the topic. Now, when you say you don't know much on the topic, you can't expect, which they probably don't, that what they think in their heart's going to uproot. I don't think that. Well, they say, I believe this like this. Right? Now, you could probably just go bink and knock it out because it doesn't make any sense. I say, what about this? And what about that? That's what I believe. Now, has that thought process, been dissected, looked into, researched, ChatGPT, AI, right? Has anyone gone through it? No. That's what I think. It's what I believe. It's what my heart tells me. What do I care what your heart tells you? And I can't believe God would say this, that, and the other thing. And I can't believe he would care and blah, blah, blah. Are you claiming to be a, expert in these things? Or you have to see like what they're digging at. Well, someone with a little bit of knowledge is going to be able to see through it. So then someone's going to spit this out. I told somebody once, I said, listen, I hear what you're saying. I said, I'll humor you. It's not a good thing to say. Maybe it looks like you're conceited. Okay. I said, I'm studying this stuff for 25 years, 20 years, whatever, 30 years. Now, again, that make me an expert in everything? No, certainly not. Right? See, but the kicker is the other side doesn't respect that. Right? So they say, well, you may know more about this, but this is what I think. Based on what my heart tells me. Or I get what your heart tells me. Is it true? Did you research it? Did you make a thesis? Did you prove it? Right? That's the way you argue, normally. Bring evidence. And then people get, hot under the collar. Why don't I have to bring evidence? Blah, blah, blah. And you're a fanatic. Okay. They start calling you names, different things. So it has nothing to do with fanaticism, right? Either it's true or it's not true. Now, if you don't think it's true, show me why it's not true. They can turn it and say, you show me why it is true. Okay. You want me to show you why it's true? No. They don't want. Right? At the very least, they want to get under your skin. At the very least, they want to fluster you. They want to make fun of you. Right? And in most cases, total waste of time. Total waste of time to answer them. Christians, even worse. They say, well, I think I've been lied to in the church for so long. So listen, there's a lot of evidence showing it can't be true. You want to hear it? No. Okay, you know what you're dealing with. Most people are not intellectually honest, as we always say. But the frustrating part is, that I shouldn't say frustrating, but you have to take what they say, and not just knock them down. You're gonna be nice, so to speak. The problem is they start saying things that they don't. What's the main problem? The main problem is they don't respect you. They don't respect what you believe in, right? They don't respect what you do. But you have to show respect for them. Yeah, it's a hard thing. It's like having two hands behind your back and getting slapped, and you can't answer, right? So, yeah, it's a very hard thing, right? And most people, again, want acceptance. They understand they probably won't get acceptance, but they want to be respected. And when someone makes fun and they put down and this and that, they totally disrespect you, regardless of what level of knowledge you have or not. Yeah. So that's frustrating. So people say all kinds of things that don't make any sense, that literally don't make any sense, and you have to respect that. Right? And they say, well, that's my opinion. I'm not going to live my life that way and educate my kids that way. Okay. Right? But you start to break that down and you say, really? Like, you think that makes sense? You think that's what, we have statistics the other way, we have proof the other way. People are not into truth. They're not into truth. Right? But the hard thing, again, what's the whole point here? The hard thing is you're hearing things from people that don't want to talk to. Not only that, but they disrespect you. Now, you say, they disrespect me, I can disrespect them. And the Torah says no. The Torah says you don't want to do that. It's taking revenge. You'll say they deserve it. Good. They deserve it. Okay. When it comes to Lashon Hara, for instance, the Chofetz Chaim says you're not allowed to speak Lashon Hara against somebody amongst the Jewish people who's part of your people. Now, what does that mean, part of your people? Because someone here asks, who's considered a heretic? So we'll get to that now. Someone who doesn't believe the Torah is from God. They believe the entire Torah except one verse in Tanakh is not from God. That makes them a denier of God. That makes them a denier of Torah. There are different levels. Different levels. One level of a heretic is they believe in JC. Idolatry. Right? So, the Gemara says that someone who's a heretic, someone who says, what do I need the rabbis for? That's the level of being a heretic. The Rambam has different levels. Has a number of different levels. Someone who denies the Torah, someone who denies prophecy of the prophets. It's another level. Someone who believes every verse in the Torah is from God except for one. They don't believe in the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. They're different levels. There are different levels. But the very profound thing here, the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, who's considered a heretic? An Abikoris, right? Who's considered a heretic? Somebody who doesn't believe, who scoffs Thremas. Someone who makes fun of them. Someone who says, basically, what do I need these rabbis for? That's what the Gemara says is an Abikoris. But we know there are other Gemaras that say, someone is what we call a kofar be'ikr, right? Someone who denies the essence of Torah. That means either they deny the Torah is from God, or they deny prophecy of Moses, they deny prophecy of the prophets. Yeah, even if they believe every verse is from the Torah except one. The Rambam says at different levels. But it's very interesting. The Gemara says, and this since chutzpah is one of the 15 signs that of living in the generation of the coming of the Messiah, many have said, idiots, people don't know anything, right? And such hatred for Torah is exactly what the rabbi said. What do I need them for? What good are they? They don't do anything. They don't do anything for this world. That, says the Gemara, is heresy. There are different levels, right? Different levels. What if... Now, there's a difference of opinion. Tinok Shenishba is also a heretic. Denies God, denies Torah, right? But there are two different ways of looking at someone who's considered captured by the non-Jews. Child captured by the non-Jews, meaning a Jew doesn't know anything about Torah, grew up as a potato farmer in Idaho, as we said before. No offense to anyone's potato farmer grew up in Idaho. They grew up knowing nothing. Okay. Now, based on that, there are two opinions. Chazon Ish, Avram Yisrael Karowitz of blessed memory, a Torah giant, the last generation, nothing to talk about, started the community in Bnei Brak, and he says that in Abikoris, Tinok Shenishba, what basically things they do are only because they don't know what they're doing. Right? But doesn't make them a heretic. They say heretical things and do heretical things. Okay. But the only reason they do it is because they don't have education. They don't have proper Jewish education. Comes on Reb Chaim Brisker. Reb Chaim Brisker says, even though he doesn't know anything, he's still a heretic. That doesn't change. He's lacking knowledge. Very good. Ignorance isn't bliss over here. Says Reb Chaim Brisker, still a heretic. Chazon Ish says no. He's got a status of Tinok Shenishba, like somebody who never learned. So what he does is like he did it by accident. Rav Chaim Brisker disagrees. Two different ways of looking at it. Right? They both agree. Right? They both agree what the person's doing is wrong. But Rav Chaim Brisker doesn't care the fact that he doesn't have knowledge. Is what he's saying, is what this person's saying heretical or not? Yes. Does it matter according to Rav Chaim Brisker if they had any Jewish education or not? No. According to Chazon Ish, that's the whole point. That is the whole point. They never had proper education. So you can't call them heretic. And the reason you can't call them heretic is because they don't know anything. That's the status of Tinuk Shenishba. Now, comes along, so now to the point, I mean, that really, I think, answers the question, but to the point is, what does Chofetz Chaim say about Lashon Hara? Can I speak about these people whenever I want? Can I speak Lashon Hara against them? Right? It's because the Chofetz Chaim says, if they're doing something that takes them outside of the Jewish people, right? They deny any of the 13 principles of faith, and they don't repent, right? They deny resurrection of the dead. They deny coming of the Messiah. They deny reward and punishment, prophecy, emotion, Rabbeinu, greater than everyone else. Whatever the 13 principles are, unless they repent, unless a Jew repents, yeah, they lose their status as a Jew. Because these are principles that are the essence of what makes a Jew a Jew. Now, a non-Jew, it's good for them to know what these are. Not obligated in them per se, right? But a good thing for them to know. Okay. Doesn't make them a heretic either way. But in this case, says the Chofetz Chaim, if they're not doing what we call Maisa Amka, they're not keeping Torah mitzvahs. They're not keeping the actions of your people, i.e. Torah mitzvahs. Can I speak Lashon Hara against them? Right? And people see, on social media, for better or for worse, the rabbis call out other rabbis. Call them heretics, this, that. So how can you do that? Why is that permissible? You either transgress the prohibition of Lashon Hara, right? More than 30 prohibitions in one shot. Or it's even worse, both the shame or libel. Right? Either way, it's bad. Comes on the Chofetz Chaim, it says it's permissible. Not only is it permissible, you have an obligation to warn people. Right? When it comes, for example, when it comes to a shidduch, someone interested in getting married, right? And they hear from somebody that the potential, let's say, groom to be, he's got certain chisronos, certain things he's lacking in. Now, this is Lashon Hara, right? Because it doesn't paint them in a good light. A person can say, well, maybe they're stingy, maybe they're haughty, maybe this. Okay, certain things you may have to look into. You might, because it might cause someone damage. Yeah. Yeah. But what if they say, and they have firsthand knowledge, there are certain conditions here. They have firsthand knowledge this person's an absolute heretic. This person's an absolute abikars. That, 100%, you have an obligation to tell. Again, there are certain conditions. If you know, right, or if you heard from someone else, you have to verify it. You absolutely have to verify. You can't give it over verbatim. Right? You can warn the person, but it has to be verified. Right? That's why the person saying it should know, should have heard directly from the person. But again, say that. That's Lashon Hara, says the Chofetz Chaim, just the opposite. If you don't say that, you transgress the prohibition of lo samar al dam re'echo. You're not allowed to stand by when someone's blood is being spilled. The person has to know. For sure the person has to know. But that's permissible. That's permissible under certain circumstances. Now, in this case, if you know the person's a heretic, whether they know, it doesn't matter, according to Chazon Ish or Chaim Brisker, whether it's because they don't know anything, or it's because they're a heretic anyway, regardless of whether they know something or not. Could a Jew speak about, say anything they want against this Jew? Yes. Shocking. People are going to say, why? Why is it permissible? Right? I'm not saying every second of every day you have to do it, but you're allowed to do it. Why? Because they're not doing Ma'aseh Amcha. They're outside the Jewish people right now. So really, technically, you say, well, if they have status of a non-Jew, I can speak about Lashon Hara against a non-Jew as much as I want. I could. No offense to non-Jews listening. Yeah, I could. Why not? Right? Why not? That's not a good thing to do. Because then you might speak about a Jew. You might, in Lashon Hara, everyone transgresses a certain level. So you might a non-Jew, you shouldn't say. Are you allowed to? 100%. 100%. Not part of your people. Part of people, you have different obligation. Okay. But if your people, let's say, secular Jew married to a non-Jew. Yeah? Now that's a red line. That everybody knows is a red line. Right? As we said before, you ask any Jew associated with the synagogue, they say, according to the Bible, you have to marry, a non-Jew? They'll say, no buts. That's it. No, good. This person, that's a red line. That's a red line. Yeah. So somebody like that, can I make fun of them if I want to? Could. It's not forbidden. It's certainly not forbidden. Right? Should I do it all the time? Different issue. Am I allowed to? They're not a Jew. They're not doing what they're supposed to do, regardless of what they know or not. Right? But you should have a purpose in doing it, not just, shooting off your mouth. At the same time, a heretic is worse. When they know something, they don't know something. They deny God, they deny the Torah. Now, 100%, can I call them out and say you shouldn't listen to this person because of what they say and what they do? Yes. 100%. You're warning people. Would I warn people every second of every day? No. We need to warn people. There are times you need to warn people. Some people do it more, some people do it less, but they have to be warned. Right? And the mistake people make is they'll say, okay, rabbis calling out rabbis. Okay. This person should be even called a rabbi for the things they say. If they repent, very good. So let them repent. If they don't repent, you bash them. Why do you bash them? Why is there a mitzvah to bash them? It's not even Lashon Hara. Why is there a mitzvah to bash them? To warn people. To make sure people do not fall underneath their clutches, so to speak. So I was speaking to someone Friday night, and we both went to the same the same Zionistic yeshiva. He was like 2 years later than me, so our paths never crossed. It just happens his son's marrying a girl that we know, woman, whatever, very close to. So whatever. So I ended off with him Thursday night or Wednesday night at this engagement party, and then whatever. Saw him over Shabbos, so we were talking. And so I told him about, the head of the yeshiva that basically said that, doing the army is more important than learning Torah. And I told him, I said, when I left the yeshiva and I was leaving, he said, all I care about is you go to a Zionist place and that you should do the army. So I asked him the following question. I told him this. I asked him the following question. And the question was, if I have an opportunity to sit and learn exponentially, go through the entire Talmud, learn everything, right? And money's not an issue at that time. Money's not an issue. I can sit for years, technically for decades, be able to sit and learn. So I asked point blank question. Are you going to tell me that doing the army is more important? And this is when they didn't need Orthodox Jews in the army. Very clear. They didn't need Orthodox Jews in the army. Right? A friend of mine they got married, and he had to fight his way in the army. They didn't need him. He fought his way to get into the army to serve. They didn't need him, though. Now, today, okay, it might be a different case, but that's not the topic. In any case, he said this is more important. doing the army is more important. Now, even in a case where they don't need you. I said it's more important than learning Torah. There's nothing more important. Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. It's nothing more important than learning Torah ever. All right, sometimes you have to close the Gemara and do other things. Okay. You want to tell me that's more important? First of all, it's all discussing whether it's fit to live in Israel in the first place. Right? Difference of opinion between the Rambam and the Ramban. Right? Whether if you don't, if a Jew doesn't live in Israel, you transgress every second, you're not here. Or it's a mitzvah that if you're able to do it, fine. If not, not. Difference of opinion. But even want to tell me, according to the one that says, it's a mitzvah to be here, okay, at the same time, what I say is, it's a part of the mitzvah to do the army also. No, some people say yes. Some people say they go hand in hand. Okay. Right? If there's a war, and it's an obligatory war, like, the high priest with the Urim and Tumim says you have to go to war, everybody goes to war. Everybody. Right? Someone just got recently married. He also goes to war. Everybody goes. And if it's not that case. Now, there's a big argument today. People would say it's mandatory. Okay. But even without getting into all that. Is there anything, if you didn't have that obligation, there are times you say, a person comes across the path of a dead body. So then, if no one else around, you have to bury the body. You stop learning, you have to bury the body. If you see a bride and groom, you stop learning, you make them happy, you dance in front of them, whatever. Right? In certain cases, you stop learning. Okay. But if you have an opportunity to sit and learn, and you can actually be something, and someone's going to say, the rabbi to boot, the head of a yeshiva to boot, to say, no, this is the most important thing. The most important thing. No one says you don't need an army. We're not arguing that. Every generation need an army. Good. Many people sit and learn also. Very good. Someone's got the ability to be something, like really be something. Go through things properly. Yeah? You still want to tell me? That was my argument. I said, you still want to say that's the most important thing? He said, yes. My Rebbe on that, when I told him the story, his beard went like this, like Yosemite Sam. Not exactly. He said, it's unbelievable today. He said, you can have somebody say there's something more important than Torah. And he flipped. He said, the fact that you're not part of that, he said, I'll give you all the kavod, all the honor. He said, I'll take it further. This goes in the book. You're going to tick some people off, but this goes in the book. Right? And that is, he said, I would stand up for you in honor because you're not like that. So I really took it, never do this. But I said, really? That you would stand up for, this is you're talking about, now he's the Torah giant of the generation. I'm like, really? You would stand up for me? If I walked in a room? So I told him, I said, listen, if you see me far away walk in a room, you probably don't have to stand up. I said, if I'm very close to you, I walk in like within, a few arm lengths, then you probably have a question. So he looked at me and goes, look, I just gave you a compliment. He said, don't blow it. I said, yeah, I think I just crushed it. I think I just demolished it. It's like, yeah, whatever. But you imagine? Someone got the chutzpah to say, again, we're not talking about where everyone has to go to war. Yeah, I don't want people hammering and saying, oh, no, it only means in specific case. No! Nothing's more important than learning Torah. That's it. Nothing. You got to go to war, you go to war. Okay? We're not talking about that. We're not talking about anything else. If someone got the opportunity to sit and learn for 20 years, it can actually become something. You want to tell me he's got to do that? Really? And this person said yes. Right? The same example, similar example, Rabbi Kiva comes with 12,000 students. Right? He comes with 12,000 students to his house. As he's about to knock on the door, the Gemara says, he hears his wife say, if my husband Akiva was here, I'd tell him to go for another 12 years. And Rabbi Kiva turns around and leaves with his students. Everybody asks the question, when did he go in? Say hello to his wife, say hello to his kids. He hadn't seen his wife and kids in 12 years. 12 years. Don't you think she would have got nachas? She would have been so happy, seeing all his students. He would have seen his kids. What an unbelievable sanctification of God's name. His father-in-law would have bowed down to him, seeing what he became. Unbelievable. And he walked away. And he walked the other way. So everybody asked the question, what happens? Why didn't he go in? At least say hello, something. So what's the answer? The answer is, if he would have done that, he wouldn't have been the same Rabbi Akiva. You know why? Because 12 and 12 is not 24. Yeah, person said I studied for 2 hours. Really? 2 hours straight? You studied? So really it's like 40 minutes, 20-minute break. So really you studied 80 minutes, right? I don't know, an hour and 20 minutes. But he didn't study the whole time. That's not the same thing. Right? That's not the same thing. 12 and 12 is not 24. 12 and 12 is not 24. So studying for a year, and then another year you're in the army, then study for 6 months, another 6 months, and this and that. It's not the same. It's not continual. Right? Say, a person got sick, or let's say, I don't know, they got the flu, they're out for 2 weeks. Right? They got, I don't know, someone got hepatitis. I remember a friend of mine, bless him, had hepatitis. He did the thing with the birds, and he got better. Right? But he's on a commission for, a couple months. Okay. That's different. That's not doing it to yourself. Right? Someone is learning continuous, and this is the point. If you're learning continuous, there are no breaks. Right? In general. You're not taking a half a year break, maybe more, maybe less. It doesn't matter. Right? It's got to be continuous. When it's continuous, it's much stronger. So for someone to say, I'm going to break that, and you're going to have to do X, Y, and Z in between, very hard to say. Very, very hard to say. Yeah, I wouldn't say very hard to say. It's impossible to say. Because somebody says like that, that means it's something more important than Torah. And according to this, there's nothing more important than Torah. Nothing. Hey, because nefesh, other things. Fine. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about any of these extraneous cases. We're talking about a case where everything's okay, so to speak. And that person's job is to sit and learn. And to sit, to learn, to learn, to learn, to learn. That's what he said. That's your obligation. Well, I went to my Rebbe once. I was asking him all these bus bombings here years ago. And I started asking things about politics. I was very much into politics or whatever. And he stopped me straight dead in my tracks. And he said, 95% of the time, you happy the way God runs the world? I was like, yeah, probably. He said, the other 5% you won't understand in 10 lifetimes either way. You're not going to understand. Right? And there's a moot point even to try and understand. Right? So he said, forget about politics, this and that. Who runs the world? Who's in charge of the world? God's in charge of the world. Lei malachim biyad Hashem. Right? The hearts of kings are in the hands of God. Right? God's pulling the strings. Okay. Are there things that we understand? No. And who's in power? Does it matter? Doesn't matter. Nice. Hey, but if the left's in power, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. It's going to be so bad. God runs the world either way. He's the one putting into power, taking out of power. That's what he does. Why? We don't understand. Anyone understand, without getting into politics, anyone understand how Trump got into power? Anyone understand how he got out of power? Yeah, they got back into power. Yeah, mind-boggling. In a lot of different ways. Take someone with no political experience, nothing, outside the political establishment. Mind-boggling. Without conspiracy theories. God wants him in power. Why? Don't know. Maybe just to protect Israel right now. Right? Who knows? Does that mean he's a saint? Oh, no. Yeah, that means he's got good character traits and he could throw, potentially Israel under the bus at one point. He could, in theory. Yeah, the maniac in that sense. Okay. Right? But he's in power for a reason. Right? Clinton had 9 lives. God wanted him in power. God wanted him in power. Never should have been there in the first place. Never should have got out of the primaries back in the day. It's got impeached in the process also. But still, people love Clinton. Absolutely love Clinton. Mind-boggling. Why some people in power, not in power, get thrown out of power. It's like God wants. Yeah, you got these spin doctors, that's what they get paid big money for, to say why and how and this and that. But at the end of the day, it's what God wanted. Anyone know why, Putin decided to invade Ukraine when he did? People have their ideas. Why all of a sudden then? But we understand if God runs the world and he's in charge, he's calling the shots. He did it then for whatever reason. Yeah, everyone thought, that's going to be coming the Messiah. He's got nuclear weapons, wants to take over the world. That's not the goal. Certainly not his goal. Wants to bring Russia back to whatever it was and get lands back that he thinks they deserve. Okay. Is he a megalomaniac? He's going to take over Europe and other places? Maybe some people think, maybe. But he's having a hard time in Ukraine right now. So, very hard to imagine. But either way, why that? Why is it still going on? Right? What are the ramifications? You can spend months, looking into this thing and what's behind it and what this person says, and you see contradictions and all kinds of. You'll never know. You'll never know for sure. People have their theories. Okay, could it be the beginning of the end, and it makes the biggest world war, and then Mashiach comes? Could. A lot of people thought maybe that's going to be the beginning of the end. We don't see it's happened. The thing with Iran is more possible. Okay, nobody knows. Nobody knows. Right? There is one thing, that, we're very vulnerable, and I've even spoken about this a number of times, and that is in the land of Israel itself, they're persecuting ultra-Orthodox Jews, and saying basically learning Torah is not valid. They don't have rights. Right now, they're looking at the bigger picture because they don't do anything for society, which isn't true. And many people do work. I mean, a lot of people learning, but a lot of people do work also. But they're looking at it from the vantage point of the army. Now, they may have a point now because, maybe right now they do need more manpower. Okay. Right? But to make it illegal to learn Torah, not illegal. You would think this is Russia back in the day, that they made it illegal to learn Torah. So now they're taking benefits away. Significant benefits. Right? Thinking wrongly, while thinking, okay, we're going to break them. We're going to entice them. Yeah, we are going to entice them with money. Right? Says the government. We are going to entice them with money, and they're going to break. That's their theory. The more we entice them, the more they're going to break. The more they'll do the army, we'll take off the problems with them. Once they join the army, and that's great. And then they'll get all the benefits. Right? That's their goal. That essentially is their goal. The mistake is people aren't budging. They're not going to budge. Right? But what's the point? The point is, as my Rebbe said, you make it illegal to learn Torah. That's what they're saying. Every other country in the world, maybe except for Russia and some other places, right, that are totalitarian, right, and all that, or any religion, more or less. Yeah, make it illegal, or make it illegal. In every other country you've had in the world, when it comes to war in general, who's exempt from serving? Divinity students. Everywhere, not just. That's how some people got out of the Vietnam War, right? But still, if some countries know that and hold that position, let's say, how can the Jewish people not hold that in the land of Israel? It's mind-boggling. Mind-boggling, right? So Rabbi would say, if they're going to fight against us, okay, we're going to continue to do what we need to do because that's the benefit of this state. Even though it's not a Torah state, it gives benefit to the state and protects it by Torah learning. Now, people say it's too many people and it's this and it's that. Okay. Which, could be argued because they need more manpower. Okay. But at the end of the day, right, to make it illegal, and they're saying that they don't have any right to do it because you have other responsibilities. can't imagine, as my Rebbe said many times, can't imagine in God's eyes that looks very good, right? I could understand, back in the day, in Russia and other places, what was the worst thing that could happen to a Jew? He gets conscripted in the army. That was a death sentence, right? A spiritual death sentence. And most people got conscripted in the army. They left their Judaism, right? Very well proven. Very, very well proven. Yeah, so I understand it. Though, in countries like that, you have no choice. You got drafted. It's either that or, I guess jail or death or who knows what, right? Right? We can't have that. Yeah, in the world, can you have that? They tried, in England. A funny story. In England during the war, the I don't know, the army, police, whatever, came into yeshivas trying to, get more people to, help in the cause. They come into my Rebbe's yeshiva, right? Rav Moshe Schneider, the yeshiva of Rav Moshe Schneider, our blessed memory. And they start trying to convince, students to help out in the war effort. And each one said the same thing, right? In other words, they say, don't you know, probably have family members being slaughtered. Don't you want to be part of, not just like taking revenge, but, helping the war effort, this and that. And each one, one second. Each one said the same thing. They said, Abraham shall help. God's going to help. Right? God's going to help. So, Moshe Schneider was terrified of this, of this thing that was going to happen. So he declared like a fasting. Declared a fasting. Fasting, St. Tehillim, whatever. And each student that they interviewed said the exact same thing. They said the exact same thing. And they tried to convince them very strongly. Don't you know what's going on in Europe? Don't you know people, your family's probably being slaughtered, probably nobody left of them. And, you got probably, siblings, parents, cousins, this, that, probably all being slaughtered and whatever. And what each student they interviewed said the exact same thing. The exact same thing. God will prevail. My job is to sit and learn. And that's the greatest protection. So when it was the police of the army, one of them, after they saw this and they heard this, they said this is a beit meshugoyim. This is like a house of crazy people. These people are absolutely out of their minds. Yeah, that was the conclusion they made. These people are sick puppies. They're out of their minds. They can help. They don't want to help. They don't see what's going on or whatever. And they're learning these old crusty books or whatever. They left them alone. They walked out the door. They didn't bother them again. Moshe Schneider said that was a nice going. That was a revealed miracle, an absolute revealed miracle. Right? They could take them forcefully. They wanted to. Right? They wouldn't be able to do anything. Against it. The law of the land. What are you going to do? They pull you out. They pull you out. Right? But, it's democracy also, right? England was a democracy, still is a democracy for the most part, right? So they fasted and they prayed and everything else, and they looked at them like they were absolutely out of their minds, right? According to them, that they were absolutely out of their minds. And what happened? Saved the entire yeshiva, right? From being, from being taken away. They threatened them. They said, listen, if you don't send people, we're gonna shut down the whole place. They could have. They absolutely could have. Now, the fact, which is actually kind of funny, is the fact they looked at it like it was a crazy, it was a place for crazy people. Yeah. So literally they could have shut it down. Literally they could have shut it down. Yeah, because they're crazy. So make it an insane asylum. Could have done that in theory, but they said that these people are crazy, and they left, and the yeshiva stayed intact, and people sat and learned day and night, during the war. Everyone, a lot of people, moved to other places, in England because they were getting bombed. London was getting bombed on a daily basis, right? Regardless of that, there was an open miracle. Everyone's saying the same thing. God's going to protect, and learning Torah is the greatest protection, and that's the greatest protection we can do for family. But don't you know, people getting slaughtered and this, that. But that's what each person they interviewed said. After hearing that so many times, they shrugged their shoulders, they walked out. And they said these people are nuts. Right? Open miracle. Literally an open miracle. The entire yeshiva was saved. Saved. Right? Torah protects. You need a standing army. No one disagrees. Right? We're not disagreeing with that point. Right? The point, the point is you need people to pray for them. Right? You 100% you need. 100%. 100% you need protection. Right? Because if you don't have that spiritual protection, physical protection doesn't matter. So the point is, when you're running after yeshiva students and trying to get them to do all kinds of things that are not in their interest, that is the worst thing you can do. Why? Because they're the ones protecting Jewish people with the army. Right? Again, you're not saying you don't need the army, you need the army. Right? But at the same time, it sounds ludicrous that one of the only places in the world that looks at Torah study, that looks at Torah like that a Torah study as being illegal. Right? Right? That's what it is. Right? Other places understand that. There is such a thing as divinity students and what they're obligated and not obligated in society. Most societies have that. That's normal. Except here. Which is a crazy thing because it's made up of Jews. But who was it, besides the students of the film Lagoon, were the first Zionists that actually came to drain the swamps, and a lot of them, died in the process. A lot of the religious Zionists that came were communists, for goodness sakes. Communists. Yeah, they believe in God. They're atheists. Yeah, I believe in the work of my hands. Okay, but they're atheists. That's, and they pass that down generation to generation. So they don't believe in Torah. They want to believe in Torah. They just want to be among Jews. They want to be able to defend themselves, etc. All right, let me take some questions here. A lot of questions here. Can anyone be an expert in anything? Things are always changing. More details are discovered all the time. Why not? If someone is an expert, let's say in medicine, certain types of medicine, whatever it is. Now, can it be that there will be nuances in that field? Yes. 100% there can be nuances in any field. But that doesn't mean they don't have expertise. Right? Maybe there are going to be some changes. Right? Maybe there will be some new discoveries. There's always new discoveries. Right? That's true. Now, the question is going to be, is the new discovery going to be something that's going to uproot everything they already learned? Right? It could change the way they think on certain things. Is it going to change everything they're an expert in? I don't think so. I can't, I can't imagine. It maybe. I mean, in theory, maybe something could knock the whole thing off. Right? I would think it's probably kind of rare. Because usually in most fields, we say ein davar chadash tachas hashemesh, right? There's nothing new under the sun. So there could be certain innovations, okay, but the question is going to be: is the innovation going to uproot everything they know and not make them an expert in the topic? Yeah, maybe there's some cases like that. Could be. There are some cases like that. I would think for the most part. Things are always, evolving, so businesses have to, evolve as well, and they have to multitask and be able to know how to do a bunch of different things. But that doesn't, some things may change. Right? I'll give you an example. Real estate. Real estate's a good example. 2008, everything crashed. right? Yeah, the mortgage crisis and all that. A lot of people were buying on credit. They had credit, right? And then what some people would do, and talking about real estate, I saw this, some people would take out money in the back ends, right? They would take out money, after the deal was done. They would buy other properties, do other things, with the money, and then people got caught. They got caught because they couldn't afford or whatever the case is, and there were a ton of foreclosures. So then things had to be done differently, right? Now, what does that mean? It means the banks were going to be much more careful in how they scrutinize somebody, right? And how they're going to look at what they have, and how much they can borrow, and whatever, right? So it became much more difficult to get loans. So now people are going to buy properties as investors and this and that. Now they got to figure out a different way how they're going to do it because they can't do it the same way, right? And today now it's more difficult, also because the interest rates are higher, much higher. So even someone's going to buy property has to be, well undervalued, even if they, could get a mortgage, but they don't want to take up so much credit. They don't have to do that, right? So to speak, because otherwise the margin of how much they can make is less, right? So that's a good example, right? In other words, what they know in real estate doesn't necessarily change per se, but the parameters of what they do now may have to change because of the circumstances, right? The knowledge that they have in investing in this and that is still there, right? But now you have to work with different things in the system, right? In order to make it all work. Okay, but that doesn't mean they don't know what they're doing, right? It just means they have to change certain things. So can someone be, so a short answer, long answer is, can they be an expert in a field if there are new innovations? Yes. Right? What if the innovation, now you're asking the $1 million question, what if the innovation goes against everything they thought and they studied or whatever? That could happen. Right? In theory, that could happen. Is it probable? I wouldn't think so. I think most things will probably stay intact. For the most part. They can stay still an expert in that, even though things evolve. They're going to have to evolve as well in different things, right? But it doesn't necessarily knock them out 100%. That's what I would answer. Someone says, doesn't Torah say God gave humans the ability to choose? Yes. Heretic doesn't necessarily mean to choose. What's the now I'm just curious. Strict definition is anyone who holds the teacher's opinions go against the official accepted beliefs of their group. Right? Torah is mostly used in religion. Right? In other words, you're part of a group and you go against the beliefs in that group, that makes you heretic. Right? According to that definition. Yeah, they don't want to accept the core belief. Right? Let's say that's the definition. Right? Now, the question's going to be, if all religions are heretics, why are they heretics? Right? They're false religions. Right? Now, most of these so-called religions believe in God or a God or some supernatural being. Right? Now, that may or may not be idolatry. Maybe one God, could be. If it's many gods, yeah, that would be a problem. That would definitely be a problem. Right? The problem with all other religions, even to believe in God, which is not necessarily a bad thing, even if it's idolatry, it's still better than being an atheist, right? Nonetheless, the problem is going to be at the false religion either way, right? Even if they believe in God, right? You say, well, it's not the same God. I don't know. I don't know if it's not necessarily the same God. They're misled in what they think this God is or what he does or whatever, right? But the question has come up, I've seen it asked in different places also, and that is, what's better, right? I get these questions all the time. What's better, this or that, right? An atheist, right? An atheist or a Christian. Now, a Christian is idolatrous. We believe it's idolatrous. Okay. So if it's idolatrous, very good. But at least they believe in God at some level. They certainly believe in God. Muslims also believe in God, right? Might be the same God, according to many, right? These other so-called religions also believe in God. So isn't that better than being an atheist? You say, but, it's idolatry. No, idolatry is really bad. You're right. But denying God altogether is worse. That's worse. Right? So if it's going to be a go against something that is established, a core, right? A core principle, you're right. Everyone's got the choice. Everyone's got the choice. You know, you can make the wrong choice, right? The Torah says, let us see what's going on in Sodom, who's we. So Rashi says, the person's gonna make a mistake and think there's more than one God. Okay. Does God want you to make that mistake? No, you have a choice. You have free choice to make a mistake or not. Everyone's got that free choice, right? Even though free choice might be limited in many ways, you have that free choice. If you have that free choice, yeah, you can make the right decision, wrong decision, right? So to speak, right? So doesn't mean we're all heretics. I mean, there may be heresy. It's a good Musar idea. There may be heresy in all of us, in the sense that, we do things that God doesn't want us to do, but that gives us free choice, right? We have free choice, right? A person, I mentioned last time, Perkei person may be more afraid of man than they are of God, right? Person's in a closed room and they're hiding things or whatever, right? Because they're afraid of what a person may see. Okay. But if God is everywhere, let's just say, if God is everywhere, then he can see what you're doing even in a closed room. So why are you more afraid of man than God? Does that make you a heretic in that sense? It does. We all have some heretical things inside of us. It doesn't necessarily mean it makes us a heretic, per se. If a person's going against the core belief, the God is one, yeah, that makes you a heretic. Right? If a person questions why God does certain things, does that make them a heretic? No. Does that make them have a lack in emunah? Yes. Doesn't necessarily make them a heretic. Not everything makes a person necessarily, a heretic, but if you're going against core principles, core principles of whatever the Torah says, yeah, that certainly can make you a heretic. Make you have a lack of emunah also. It depends what, it depends what it is. But it's not the point. The person has free choice. You can always, making the bad choice doesn't make you a heretic. Right? That's what makes you a heretic. Denying God makes you a heretic. Right? Denying God runs the world makes you a heretic. For the most part. Saying that Moshe Rabbeinu is the greatest of all prophets, that'll make you a heretic. Right? Having questions on, why God does certain things when we're in pain does not make you a heretic. Right? It makes you lack of emunah, not having proper faith and belief in God. Okay. Not the same thing. Right? Not the same thing, but if a person, again, not for this generation, but in general, if a person would sin against God, whatever sin they do, yeah, isn't that a rebellion against God? It's a rebellion. You're going against what the Creator said to do. That's a rebellion. Right? I'm not saying it's heresy, it's a rebellion. Yeah, but today you wouldn't say that. I mean, it's true, but you wouldn't say that. Why do most people sin? I asked this to my Rebbe 20 years ago more, and he said the reason people sin today is desire. I said, isn't every sin, part of every sin is considered a, what do you call it, rebellion against God? He goes, no. Some people question that. Some people say, well, it's a rebellion either way, because you're doing what God doesn't want you to do. Okay. But he says it's desire. That's why people say it. It's desire. It's not a rebellion. Not rebelling to rebel. It's a desire. Right? It's a desire. What about the people who are idolaters, but are good people? Sincerely believing that they are praying to their true God. They're in trouble. They are in trouble. Yeah. And I say this all the time, so I don't want to harp on this. I'll mention one thing. What's your definition of good? Right? They don't cheat on the taxes. They don't commit adultery. I've heard people say of some people, they're the nicest of people. They're so sweet, they're kind, they're this, they're that. Okay. But are they habitual speakers of Lashon Hara? Probably. Doesn't matter what they know or they don't know. Yeah. Are they habitual speakers of Lashon Hara? They don't care? Yes. Do they curse? Probably? Yes. They blaspheme? Probably. Not necessarily in God's name. I can mention a number of things, a million things. Take revenge against people. They bear a grudge against people. I mean, they don't keep kosher. They don't keep Shabbos, other things. I'm talking about Jews. Yeah. They can be the nicest of people. And they stink to high heaven in God's eyes. And what do I care if they're nice or not? I mean, it's good. They're nice. Okay. And they're friendly and they try and help out and, okay, that's great. But in God's eyes, that's all we care about. In God's eyes. In God's eyes, do they stink to high heaven or not? They stink to high heaven. The only difference is, if they're looked at as a Tino Shanishma, like they don't know anything, so God will have mercy on them. Not not total mercy, but at the end of the day, it's like what they do is by accident, except they intermarry and do a few other things, right? There are people that are misled, right? That's true. And they believe in idolatry and they're totally misled. Okay, what's going to happen to them? Bottom line, what's going to happen to them? They're going to get obliterated. I mean, sad to say, it's one of the no high love, right? God doesn't want you to be an idolater, right? They may mean well. A lot of people mean well, right? Many people can mean well. Okay. So they mean well. That mean they should be worshiping cows? Right? That mean they should believe in JC's God and 1 and 3 and and all that? They're in trouble. They're in trouble. They could mean well. Yeah. But you break down what they really want. We're in cahoots, we're very happy, in general, evangelicals are pro-Israel and this and that. But why are they so pro-Israel? You understand why they're pro-Israel? Because if more Jews, if all the Jews will move to Israel, then they believe their Messiah is going to come. So, double-edged sword. They want to be pro-Israel because, they have ulterior motive. Okay. Right? Christians have been the nicest to Jews throughout the millennium. Nothing to talk about. But even so, right? Even so, you can have some that are very nice. Right? And they believe in what they believe in. Okay. Right? I'll grant that. Right? I'm in a somewhat generous mood now. Right? They believe they're doing the right thing. Well, aren't they going to be surprised? They're gonna be surprised. And what happens if they don't repent? What happens before they die? They don't repent. They believe they're going to JC. They're in trouble. You say it's not their fault. Whose fault is it? They were brainwashed. Okay. But anyone here was a former Christian to get brainwashed. Took them a while to get out, but they're not brainwashed. They came out of it. But God shows people can come out of it. Whether they convert or not doesn't matter. Right? That's possible. And what about the tens of millions that are in serious trouble? You pray for them. That's all you can do. Try and convince them at least to be a no-hide. Yeah. And, if it's not going to be interested, it's their choice. 100% it's their choice. Someone says, but what about all these people in India going to die? It's sad. What should we do? Should go to India trying to convince the masses not to worship cows? It's not my job. Right? I get contacted a lot of times from people from India. A lot of people. Yeah. So there are people that see the stupidity of it. Okay, everyone's not going to see it. Some people will. So the ones who want to see it will see it. That's why God gave free choice in the first place. Right? Again, I got plenty of family members into marriage. They can care less about Torah mitzvahs and make fun and this and that. Okay, so what's going to happen to them? They're in trouble. Is that going to be sad? What's going to happen? Yes. Anything I can do about it? No, not really. So that's it. You move on. It's sad, but that's what it is. And pray for them. That's what you can do. Pray for them. Right? I'm not going to say prayers will be answered, but you pray for them. According to the Torah, we are all heretics. I didn't say that. I said that there is some heresy in all of us. Doesn't make us heretics, though. Right? We're not all, if we'd all be heretics, we'd be dead. There'd be no point to keep Torah mitzvahs. Yeah, that wouldn't make any sense. Why would we keep Torah mitzvahs? If we're all going to be heretics? What it means is there some, does the person have doubts? Yes. Could a person have doubts? Yes. Could it be lack of emunah? Yes. Could a person question what God does? Yes. Does that mean they're a heretic? Doesn't mean they're a heretic. Right? Can a person have heretical thoughts? Yes. They could. Yeah, does that mean they're heretic? No. You have free choice. You can make the right choice, wrong choice. Right? But with free choice, there's always repentance. Right? There's always repentance. So even if a person had heretical thoughts, could they repent for that? Yes. They could. Oh, who says we're all heretics? We're not all heretics. According to the Rambam, if you hold what the Rambam says, in the laws of repentance, you go down the list. You go down this list, and you're holding exactly what the Rambam says you should be holding, then you're good. Then you're not a heretic. If you believe the entire Torah is from God, that makes you a heretic? No. If you believe all the prophets, it's the absolute word of God, that makes you a heretic? No. Right? Only in cases where it does make you a heretic. If a person doesn't repent, you're stuck as a heretic, right? Right? That is true. Right? That is true. But now, who says we're all heretics? Certainly not all heretics. According to the modern definition of a heretic, I'm still proud to be a heretic, but I was born a Christian. So what? So what if you're born a Christian? You came out of Christianity, right? Anyone who came out of Christianity, that's a great thing. Right? Take JC and throw him in the garbage. That's a huge thing. Does that make you a heretic? No. No, it's a different question why you were born a Christian. That's a different question, I guess. I should have been born a Jew. You should have been, but you weren't. Right? Most likely, their soul was Jewish, got the Torah Mount Sinai, and then veered off, assimilated, became a non-Jew and potentially a Christian, who knows what. But just because someone was born a certain way being born a certain way doesn't make you a heretic. Right? You're born into a Christian family. Okay, you're bad. Right? But it's not your fault. And if you would follow that religion all the way through because you were taught that way, that's a problem. That's for sure a problem. It goes against the Noahide laws. Right? So at that point, yeah, it's not a question of a person being a heretic. Right? Per se. They're an idolater. And idolater is worse. Right? In many ways. Right? It's not a question of heresy. It's a question of, it is also, but it's a question of idolatry. Right? But if you go against that, then that wipes it all out. Right? So someone who's a Noahide or decides to convert to Christianity, that knocks the whole thing out. Right? Regardless of whether a person is born a Christian or not, that doesn't matter. Whether they're born a Buddhist, a Muslim, a secular Jew becomes a Christian. Doesn't mean anything. He's still a Jew. Okay. Right? So that person now becomes an Orthodox Jew. Very good. Right? So that uproots the idolatry that they did. So being born into something doesn't mean anything. You're still liable. 100% you still be liable. But the fact the person comes out of it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you were born into. Right? The fact that you came out of it is a huge thing. Someone asks, didn't it now just make it legal to not join the army if you study Torah full time? They're working on that. Well, the one thing they're working on a law to make, to not fine them and not take away benefits if they study Torah, right? The other side is trying to make it legal for people to learn Torah and have their status legalized, right? Which secular don't want to legalize. That's the problem. They want to look at it as like they're doing nothing. They're contributing nothing. They're doing nothing, right? So they want to establish it as, it's like someone who's studying for a PhD, even if they don't get rabbinic ordination, right? Anyone studying for a PhD, they give it all the respect in the world. Why don't they give Torah the respect in the world? So they want it to be legalized, right? They are trying to work out some sort of compromise, which they're not having easy time, right? But that's exactly what part of the fight is. It's not just that they don't have to do the army, but to make Torah study legal, like it's a legal profession, so to speak. Like being a doctor, lawyer, or whatever. The secular establishment doesn't want to have anything to do with that. They don't legalize it because they don't believe in it, right? They don't believe in it. They don't want to have anything to do with it. Then they want to be like everybody else. They don't want potentially full-time learners, right? Which is kind of absurd if you think about it, because there are all kinds of routes, all kinds of benefits that divinity students have in every country, and exemptions that they have, except here. It's mind-boggling, right? Yeah, you think about it logically, it doesn't make any sense, right? And you're in a Jewish state, for goodness sakes, as well. There is spiritual brigade in the Israeli, pray 3 times a day. Okay, there are brigades that are religious brigades, right? They have a new brigade now, a Hasidic brigade, so to speak. Also, okay, so yeah, it makes it easier, right? That definitely that definitely makes it easier. But you're still under the auspices of the army, bottom line, right? Bottom line, even if you're part of these groups, it's not like you don't see anything else and nothing else goes on, right? It's still, still part of it. Christian modernism says not a heretic. Okay. But again, in any religion that denies the prophecy of Moses and goes against the prophecy of Moses is a false religion, right? It's a false religion, according to the Rambam. It's called what we call Chidushei Das. It's like a new religion. So if it's considered like a new religion, then any religion outside of Judaism that goes against the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu is out. So that makes it heresy. Yeah, it makes it heresy. It could be idolatry. It could be both. Right? Depends what it is. Right? Right? It depends what it is. But that's an issue. Right? That's a big issue over here. What's the definition? What the definition? What the definition over here is going to be and what they're going to do. But again, it's extremely strange in a place, right? In a place where the biggest Jewish community in the world, and the biggest Jewish community in the world, even though 10% are Orthodox, let's say, look at, learning Torah full time is like federal offense. I mean, you can't even make that up. 100%, you can't make that up. That's the way it is. That's what people think. But again, if people have been born and bred this way, coming here and teaching this for generations, not surprising, right? Read The Jewish State, which I wouldn't recommend, by Theodor Herzl, Schmerzel, whatever. Right? He wanted a secular state. That's what he wanted. Right? A secular state. To say Ben Gurion, the biggest mistake he said at the end of his life was he gave exemptions for yeshiva students because he thought they were going to die out. He already thought one generation they're going to be finished. So good, so I'll give them exemptions in the army. Never dreamed what would happen. Never dreamed the numbers that they are now. They say that was one mistake he said. He wished he could take back. Okay. Yeah, but again, it's just it's God's irony in many ways. In the place where you have such a strong Torah community and the biggest amount of Jews, the biggest amount of Jews in the world, where you're going to say what they do doesn't matter. Right? In other words, the Torah learning is not worth anything. I can understand by non-Jews. I understand very clearly by non-Jews. It's been that way through, centuries, throughout the millennia. I want to persecute Jews for learning Torah. It makes sense. Right? Then I can understand. But Jews doing it to other Jews is mind-boggling. Mind-boggling in that sense. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I'm gonna stop here. I do this every Sunday, 9 o'clock Eastern time, 4 o'clock Israel time. Anyone has any questions, feel free. Finally, find me on Facebook at Michael Coffman, on Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos, Q&As, ethics of my fathers, book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, Rabbi Coffman at gmail.com, RBBI, CHAIM, COFFMAN at gmail.com.